For the reasons that we've mentioned already, I don't think we're going to see strong economic growth, sustainable growth in South Africa until we change the way that we are implementing certain policies in South Africa.
South Africa has a relatively new finance minister. Enoch Godongwana has been in the job for a couple of months, but is he the right man for the job? I posed this question to Dawie Roodt in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from this longer conversation. And if you'd like to watch the full interview with Dawie Roodt, that's linked in the description below. Enjoy. In addition to running out of ideas, the government's also running out of money, as you mentioned earlier. Yeah. And we're recording on the 20th of September, Dawie. But next month, at the end of October, is going to be the medium-term budget policy statement. And we have a new finance minister who will be delivering that speech for the first time, Enoch Godongwana. So what is your reflection on his kind of political heft in comparison to his predecessor, Tito Mboweni? What are your thoughts on the new finance minister?
Yeah, it's always a relative thing. Tito Mboweni, I think, was the best that the ANC could get at that time. He was there, and it was an open secret. He was keeping the chair warm for somebody else. I liked Tito, a bit of a maverick. He wasn't really in any of those existing camps in the ANC. He was a kind of a lone ranger in his own way, with his tweets and his cooking and all that. He was a bit of a yeah, it was a lot of fun following Tito Mboweni. A nice guy, I liked him. I also liked his background being the governor of the South African Reserve Bank for quite some time, and he's got a lot of experience. He was a good guy for the time being, but clearly his heart was not in it. Then the new Minister of Finance, he was appointed. It wasn't really a surprise. I think it's, again, a good choice. Within amongst the cadres of the ANC, he's probably the best. He's been around for some time. He understands the ANC. He understands the policies or the lack thereof. And I think he can be seen as a conservative kind of Minister of Finance. I like the things that he said so far. Of course, if I have my choice, I will perhaps appoint somebody else because I don't like the policies of the ANC. But given the political realities that we have in South Africa, he's probably the best guy for the job at the moment. There's only this one issue, this little skeleton in the cupboard that we are all aware of, and having a Minister of Finance with a financial skeleton in his cupboard is not a good thing. But apart from that, I think he's probably the best that the ANC can offer at this stage. But there are tremendous challenges waiting for him. We're waiting for the medium-term budget policy statement of the minister and to see what things are going to look like. Maybe I should just make a side note here in that the state finances are actually doing a little bit better than what we thought, say, only a few months ago. And the reason for that is because of this export bonanza and all the additional taxes that are being collected because of that. So for now, things look a little bit better. And that is perhaps a little bit unfortunate because we know the ANC, whenever there's an opportunity to increase spending, they do that. And this extra bit of bonanza in the form of additional tax receipts that we're getting at the moment, some of that has already been spent on the basic income grant or the extension of this additional grant until February next year or so. So yeah, I'm a bit worried about that. The biggest challenge of the Minister of Finance will be to get his colleagues to support him and his ideas. And some of his ideas very clearly is not aligned with the ideas of some of the other colleagues in cabinet.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
So Dawie, unlike Mr. Mboweni, Mr. Godongwana has perhaps a bit more political backing within the alliance, which might give him the political capital and the leverage to perhaps rein in spending. But of course, this commodities bonanza may not last for very long. These things are cyclical, and the problem is you don't want to entrench existing programs that might be a longer-term liability. I think, as Milton Friedman once said, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. So, I think the challenge there will be also making sure that there are enough savings for that inevitable rainy day.
Yeah. What is, there is a small window of opportunity for the new Minister of Finance. If he really sticks to his guns and he keeps on cutting back on state spending like the way that they're planning to do, And I mentioned earlier that it's become inevitable that this 30 million people that depend on the state for an income, their income will fall in real terms over the next couple of years. That's the plan, but that's also part of the reality. So I think it's a small window of opportunity for him to cut back on state spending. Whether he will be able to do that or not, of course, is a different question. But I just want to touch on a word that Kusatu likes to use, and many other leftish analysts, and that's the word of austerity. We've got an austere budget, they say, which of course is absolute and total nonsense. We do not have an austere budget. The fiscal deficit in this financial year is probably going to be in the region of about 8% of GDP, and economic growth this year is going to be quite good for various reasons, statistical reasons, many of those reasons. But to talk about the fiscal deficit of 8% to GDP and call it an austere budget, it's very, very far off the mark. This is not an austere budget. This is a highly expansionary budget, exactly that we had last year, and the same that we're going to have next year. The only difference is that this year economic growth is going to be quite nice. Next year economic growth is going to start slowing down, and eventually we will move down to economic growth rate of around about 1.5%, 2% if we are lucky. But to talk about an austerity, when you talk about the fiscal deficit of 8%, simply is completely wrong and incorrect.
But there are two ways of getting yourself out of that deficit. The one way is to cut your way out through austerity measures, but the other way is to grow your way out. And in many respects, the growth is easier if you have the right policies. And some of those policies are also cost-free. So the government likes to talk about huge, massive spending allocations on infrastructure, for example. But merely by removing EWC from the table, you would send a very strong signal to investors, to the broader economic community that you're more serious about growth. So myself and my colleagues have long advocated for that, rather push for growth than trying the politically more tricky task of cutting spending and then risking getting kind of political blowback in the form of union pressure, for example.
Yeah, certainly. No, that's the right approach. It will be to get the economy to grow again, but for the reasons that we've mentioned already, I don't think we're going to see strong economic growth, sustainable growth in South Africa until we change the way that we are implementing certain policies in South Africa. But just by the way, David, there are two other ways of also getting out of your debt spiral. The one is by increasing taxes, and that's exactly what SARS is trying to do. And the other one is to get out of your debt spiral by letting inflation run amok. And I have a suspicion is that the Reserve Bank will come under pressure again when they start tightening monetary policy. And people quite often misunderstand or underestimate the effect of inflation on debt. Remember, one definition for inflation is that it erodes the value of money, but it also erodes the value of debt. And that is exactly what I think is going to happen. Within a year or two, three, once you've run out of taxpayers, and once you've run out of taxpayers' savings, and once you've run out of other sources of revenue, then the pressure on the Reserve Bank will start building up again and trying to force the Reserve Bank to create easy money, which will lead to inflation, which will then erode debt in real terms as well. So yeah, you're right. Growth is a preferred way of getting out of debt. But I'm afraid if you want to grow the economy, then you have to make people angry, especially people that are very much protected in the current environment. And I'm referring specifically to unionized workers and, of course, to the civil servants and to many, many politicians. We cannot afford that anymore. We cannot afford to protect them anymore. We need to get other people to share in the wealth-creating capacity and possibilities of South Africa as well. And I'm referring specifically to the poor and unemployed, because they essentially are prevented from taking jobs in South Africa because of things like, for example, minimum wages and the like. But yeah, that's the way to go, is to grow the economy. But I'm afraid with what we have currently, that is unlikely to be on top of the agenda quite soon.
So Dawie, this is the Solutions podcast. So let's try together to come up with some novel ideas to solve some of these problems. So imagine you've been appointed the finance minister, there's been a change in government. Where do you start? What are some of your first policies that you will put on the table? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, you might want to check out the full conversation with Dawie Roodt. That's linked over here. And I'd also be hugely grateful if you could subscribe to my other channel. That's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.